What really happened in the months and years leading up to Dying Light 2's release date? What really went wrong? How can a sequel have less concurrent players than the original Dying Light? This is the story of Dying Light 2. I've been following Dying Light 2 very closely for years now. Most notably in November of 2020, I uncovered this leaked picture of Dying Light 2. I'm not solely responsible, but I directly helped a Discord user scavenge the image, and without my help, it probably would have never surfaced. But let's not start here. We're going all the way back to the initial announcement of Dying Light 2. 2018 and 2019 is what I refer to as the golden era of Dying Light 2. E3 2018, where Techland dropped two trailers showing every Dying Light 1 player their fantasy. An insane graphics upgrade, a detailed and unique environment, and it still had that eerie feel and grim look that Dying Light 1 had. That feel that Dying Light players loved so much. When I look back on those trailers, I get chills, but I also realize just how ambitious this project was. A lot of people forget Techland originally wanted to release this game in 2019, but of course they realized it wouldn't be possible. After all, how could it be possible with all these ambitious ideas? In 2019, it only got better with a 26-minute showcase video. This video is what many people consider the peak of Dying Light 2. And sprinkled on top at the end of the video, we got a release date of spring 2020. In the showcase video, there's an awesome storyline and what seemed to be real choice making. The only complaint to be had by anybody was with the floaty parkour in the trailer, which Techland addressed and said they would try to fix. Everything else was quite literally superb. Limbs being cut off beautifully, Timon Smektala carrying PR, and was doing it maybe a little too well.
Maybe someone has some gun or maybe a shotgun, but that's basically a magic missile in this world. This is like a magic thing you can use.
This of course was the start of the gun confusion, the birth and death of wildcard factions. So many of these early ideas were absolutely great, and it's unfortunate that a lot of them ended up getting cut. As the golden era ends, we go to 2020, where the signs of disaster really start to set in. I call this era the Silent Implosion. In January, Techland released a statement announcing that Dying Light 2 would be delayed until further notice. Then in May, the first article came, claims that there were internal disagreements at Techland, claims that the amount of employees leaving the studio were irregularly large, and this is where Techland's PR started to struggle. They responded saying, translations of this article were totally inaccurate, since this article was originally Polish and translated to English. The only problem is this simply isn't the case. I personally talked to a couple Polish people on Discord, and they confirmed that this article was pretty accurate. So that was just a BS excuse to get people off their back, and unfortunately it worked. Of course they reassured us the game was still coming, and then in June, they revealed that the game was in the last stretch. In June, I also found some unreleased gameplay of Dying Light 2. It was posted within the few months before June, I believe, not exactly sure, but either way it shows the mayor of Warsaw, Poland playing Dying Light 2. This was the only thing we had on Dying Light 2 since the 26-minute trailer. Little did we know at the time, but this footage, which was very low quality, showcased the sort of transition Dying Light 2 had from the grim feeling to a more colorful and oversaturated look. In late June, Chris Avlon was released from Techland. He was released after being accused of sexual assault, which was later disproven of course, but Techland immediately released him. But it did seem that they both agreed it would be best for the game. Now this is where a lot of confusion starts, so let me break it down for you. Chris Avlon soon after claimed he doubted any of his work remained in Dying Light 2. Later on we learned what Chris really contributed to the project. In this tweet, they're claiming Chris Avlon said he only worked on 5 to 6 New Vegas style quests, but then Chris responded. He said, "This isn't correct. I worked on 5 to 6 New Vegas-like storyline drafts. The number of quests in those storylines, however, was easily over 100, not counting reactivity and branching. This indicates that he did a lot more than people actually thought, which made the situation even scarier. Without Avlon on the team, how would they be able to correctly execute his stories? Especially since in October, narrative lead Powell Selinger left Techland. This was very prominent too because he was with the company for 20 years. He was replaced with a guy named Piotr, who was a Polish TV writer for HBO. So it was clear there was still narrative work to be done on the project, and it seemed to be falling apart. After all, how could they really come out with a good story with all these important position changes so close to release? This was reinforced in February of 2021 when The Gamer released an article and later on a video about Techland. In this video, they talked about a toxic environment at Techland.
For one, Marhefka's wife is the head of the HR department.
To have a problem with my boss, and my boss's wife was the head of HR, I would not feel comfortable going to the head of HR.
Originally, the game was slated for a spring 2020 release. But unsurprisingly, this was an unrealistic goal put forth by Marhefka, despite his employees knowing full well how impossible it would be. This may relate somewhat to his blind devotion to the idea of design through iteration, which among other things, seems to fuel his belief in a less traditional developmental pipeline, which caused a falling out with now former Chief Development Officer Paweł Zawadny, who was with the company for 19 years before calling it quits over, as one of Kirk's sources puts it, a production pipeline that changes so quickly and rapidly that it might as well not exist.
To this day, I'm not going to say Techland is toxic or Techland is not toxic, but what I will say is it clearly had some effect on the development of Dying Light 2. Of course, none of Techland's fans believed this, and casual players didn't really care to look into it. So in the end, it really had no effect on them. Now going forward to May of 2021, the Dying to Know series started. This was the series where Techland showed off Dying Light 2 details. Even though there was a lot of fluff as well in there, most of the features I personally cared about, such as wildcard factions, weren't mentioned. And that's of course because they were cut from the game. Alongside the series of Dying to Know, a December 7th release date came, but that wasn't long-lived. In September, the game was delayed until February 2022. Now the next era, just before release, is defined by one person, and his name is Michael Does Life.
World Class was right about Cyberpunk, and World Class is surveying Dying Light 2, and I can tell you right here and right now that Dying Light 2 looks like a mobile game. I mean, take a look at these animations right here. This game, mind you, has been in development for years, but the lazy millennial devs are like, oh, we don't know how to code, Michael. They got excuses. They're too busy pouting on Twitter 24/7. Oh, the work environment, Michael. Shut up and do the work in Python. You need to understand that Dying Light 2 is the next Cyberpunk. For example, the marketing campaign for Dying Light 2 is eerily similar to Cyberpunk 2077.
At this time especially, performance and bugs were a big question, especially after Cyberpunk. And that's where Michael came in, because Michael was very critical of Cyberpunk, and he was right about Cyberpunk, everybody knows that. But people simply didn't want to believe it about Dying Light 2.
We're just 12 days until the release of Dying Light 2 on February 4th. And Techland is still just 12 days out, reluctant to pull that curtain back in a way that makes sense. We only have 20 seconds of base PS4 footage. We have 0 Xbox One footage. It's a huge red flag.
I personally feel he overestimated the disaster a bit. Not to say I was the most right person or anything, but I was personally saying it would be not on the level of Cyberpunk, but maybe halfway there. And I think that holds up pretty well. So the arguing between Michael Does Life and the Dying Light 2 fans commenced until the release of the game. And when the game came, it was evident there were some problems. Lots of bugs, lots of lighting glitches. I remember on the first week of release, there was times when infected would disappear, where you would hit an infected and it wouldn't react, it wouldn't even hit it. Those were really the biggest ones I saw. A lot of people have seen worse, I've heard at least. Of course, performance wasn't the greatest on PC, especially for lower end rigs. Old generation consoles weren't completely unplayable, but it wasn't anything pretty. But that wasn't the biggest issue to me. It was never the bugs that were the biggest issue to me, and I didn't realize that until after the game came out. The bigger issue to me was how Techland had completely stripped the best elements of this game. Remember that grim feel I talked about in the golden era? Completely gone. Lackluster story, and a choice system in which only a few end choices really made a difference. Floaty parkour that they said they fixed, but it was even floatier than before. It just made the parkour feel completely unnatural compared to Dying Light 1. To me, they'd taken Dying Light 2 and made it into a generic RPG. No guns, even though a character in the trailer is holding a gun, even though they were talking about guns in development. It's just so evident now how blurry the image really was when it came to so many devs and writers leaving in the process. The game overall isn't the worst, but it's nowhere near what it could have been.